Dark truths are often buried under centuries of tradition, doctrine, and fear. But not everything that was removed from the Bible was done out of irrelevance. Some things were taken out because they challenged the very foundation of what people were supposed to believe. The Tripartite Tractate from the Nag Hammadi Library is one of those ancient texts that throws a grenade into everything you thought you knew about God, creation, and humanity's place in the universe. Forget the sanitized versions you've been handed. This is the raw, unsettling account the early church didn't want you to read. We've been told there is one God, all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect in every way. But according to the Tripartite Tractate, that's not the full story. There was a being, Yaldabaoth, arrogant, flawed, and blind, who declared himself God after creating the material world. This isn't speculation. The text outlines a creation story where Yaldabaoth, a lower emanation from the higher divine realm, the pleroma, acted out of ignorance and pride. Sophia, an emanation from the highest divine source, sought to create without her counterpart, a decision that led to Yaldabaoth's birth. Not as an act of divine harmony, but as a cosmic error. Yaldabaoth believed he was the ultimate authority, unaware of the higher, purer spiritual dimensions beyond him. Yaldabaoth isn't just a rogue deity. He's the God described in parts of the Old Testament, jealous, vengeful, demanding obedience. Think about the contradictions: a supposedly all-loving God ordering mass slaughters, condoning slavery, demanding fear over love. The Gnostics, the early mystics of Christianity, recognized the inconsistencies and concluded that the God of the Old Testament wasn't the true source, but a deceiver keeping humanity trapped in ignorance. That's why the early church fathers branded them as heretics. It wasn't because their ideas lacked substance, it was because those ideas exposed uncomfortable truths. Yaldabaoth didn't stop at creating the material world. He manufactured a host of lesser beings, the Archons, designed to maintain control over humanity. These Archons, according to the Tripartite Tractate, manipulate human perception, clouding awareness with material distractions and false systems of power. Religion, politics, societal norms, all tools of control designed to keep humanity ignorant of its divine spark. And here's the part that should make you sit up: the Archons didn't just exist as some ancient myth. Their influence is embedded in the systems and institutions people bow to, ensuring that the truth remains buried. But the most shocking revelation is what this means for humanity. The physical body, according to Yaldabaoth's creation, was intended to be a prison. Lifeless. Useless. Until Sophia, out of guilt, infused it with a fragment of divine light, something Yaldabaoth didn't anticipate. That spark is the reason humans possess consciousness, creativity, and the capacity to question authority. To the Archons, this was a problem. Knowledge, gnosis, threatened their dominion. The very essence of what makes you was never meant to exist, at least not according to the false god who thought he was in charge. This wasn't some obscure belief held by a fringe cult. The Gnostics thrived in the early centuries of Christianity, presenting these ideas openly. It was only after the rise of orthodoxy, backed by Roman authority, that their texts were banned, their teachings declared dangerous. Imagine that, a global institution shaping spiritual belief for millennia by erasing texts like the Tripartite Tractate from history. And when the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered in 1945, it wasn't just an archaeological find. It was a disruption, a revelation that the official narrative wasn't just incomplete, it was manipulated. The Tripartite Tractate pulls no punches. It claims the world isn't the loving creation of a benevolent deity, but a flawed construct by a being who mistook himself for God. Humanity wasn't lovingly crafted, but formed as an accident, corrected only by a rebellious act from Sophia. And the so-called God-demanding worship? Not the highest power, but a cosmic fraud desperate to keep his creation ignorant. Conflict isn't just a human experience, it's cosmic. According to the Tripartite Tractate, long before humanity emerged, there was a war, an all-out struggle between dimensions, entities, and ideologies. Forget the peaceful creation narratives you've heard. This was chaos, deception, and rebellion on a scale beyond comprehension. The higher spiritual realm, the pleroma, represented perfection, unity, and knowledge. But outside that, something fractured. Sophia's unauthorized act of creation wasn't just a personal mistake, it triggered a cosmic chain reaction that dragged higher spiritual beings into conflict with a rogue force determined to assert absolute control. Yaldabaoth, having fashioned the material realm, wasn't content with just creating a flawed world. He wanted dominion. His first move? Sealing off the higher realms, cutting off humanity from the source of true knowledge. But the entities from the pleroma, those who remained aligned with the true source, weren't going to sit back and watch a delusional being hijack reality. They intervened. That intervention wasn't some diplomatic gesture. It was war. Not with swords or weapons, but with manipulation of dimensions, consciousness, and reality itself. Yaldabaoth responded by creating the Archons, powerful beings acting as enforcers, controlling not just physical reality, but also the layers of perception. Think of them as cosmic gatekeepers. Their job? Keep humanity distracted, ignorant, and chained to the illusion that this material world is all there is. They designed intricate systems, false religions, authoritative structures, and psychological traps to keep consciousness from expanding beyond their control. This wasn't about physical conquest, it was about intellectual and spiritual domination. The battlefield was the human mind. And while Yaldabaoth consolidated power, factions within the higher realms launched a counter-offensive. Their strategy? Infiltration. They couldn't just rip apart the fabric of reality, Yaldabaoth's arrogance had fortified it. So, they took a different approach, subtlety. They embedded sparks of knowledge into humanity, clues, myths, symbols, all designed to awaken those capable of seeing beyond the veil. Gnostic teachings weren't just random philosophical musings, they were coded messages, survival tools in an interdimensional conflict. Every Gnostic gospel, every suppressed text was a fragment of a larger plan to undermine Yaldabaoth's grip. But Yaldabaoth wasn't clueless. He adapted. Seeing that direct oppression wasn't enough, he twisted the infiltration strategy against itself. He allowed fragments of truth to circulate, but corrupted them, turning potential awakenings into new forms of control. The Archons manipulated spiritual teachings, turning them into dogmas that served their agenda. Concepts like sin, guilt, and blind obedience weren't moral guidelines, they were weapons. Psychological warfare at its finest. If humanity couldn't be kept ignorant, it would be kept confused, constantly chasing false paths. What makes this even more complex is the inner conflict among the higher entities themselves. Not all beings from the pleroma agreed on how to handle the situation. Some believed direct intervention would destabilize reality further. Others argued that leaving humanity under Yaldabaoth's rule was an unforgivable abandonment. These disagreements weren't philosophical, they were strategic. Intervene too aggressively, and you risk fracturing the cosmos further. Move too slowly, and humanity's spark of divine consciousness could be extinguished entirely. This wasn't just Yaldabaoth versus the pleroma, it was a multi-layered conflict with shifting alliances, betrayals, and tactical gambits. Meanwhile, Yaldabaoth, increasingly paranoid, intensified his efforts. He didn't just rely on the Archons. He created elaborate cosmic systems, astrological influences, time cycles, and karmic loops to trap souls in endless reincarnation cycles. Break free? Not so simple. Every attempt to transcend was met with resistance from forces designed to pull consciousness back into the grind of material existence. Birth, suffering, death, repeat. A perfect prison camouflaged as a natural order. But the higher realms had their own countermeasures. Certain human figures throughout history, prophets, mystics, visionaries, were believed to be incarnations or messengers of higher knowledge. Their purpose wasn't to start religions, but to disrupt Yaldabaoth's control. Of course, most were either silenced, misunderstood, or co-opted into the very systems they sought to dismantle. Every genuine movement toward liberation was met with a counterstrike, often from within. The Tripartite Tractate doesn't present a neat, black and white conflict. It's messy. Layers upon layers of manipulation, intervention, and counter-intervention. Humanity sits at the center, caught between forces far beyond everyday comprehension. Yaldabaoth believes in his absolute authority. Pleroma fights to reclaim stolen light. And the Archons? They ensure that the battlefield remains obscured. This isn't about good versus evil in a conventional sense. It's about knowledge versus ignorance, freedom versus control, cosmic arrogance versus the struggle for truth. There was no grand design based on love or divine intention. Human creation was a series of mistakes, power plays, and unintended consequences. It was messy, accidental, and far from the perfect image you've been taught. Yaldabaoth, after declaring himself the supreme authority, decided to create a being that would reflect his dominance. He didn't do it out of benevolence, he did it to reinforce his control. Humanity wasn't crafted as a gift, humans were manufactured as tools, extensions of a god's arrogance, designed to populate and maintain his flawed, material construct. But Yaldabaoth couldn't bring his creation to life. He formed bodies, empty shells without consciousness. This failure wasn't just a technical glitch, it was a blow to his ego. Despite his self-proclaimed status as the ultimate god, he lacked the essential spark of true creative power. That spark belonged to the higher realms, beyond his reach. This is where Sophia's role, once again, becomes pivotal, not as a redeemer but as the unintended catalyst for a far more complicated situation. Out of a mixture of pity, guilt, and a desire to correct her earlier mistake, she infused humanity with a fragment of divine essence. This act, though seemingly compassionate, created a volatile hybrid, beings crafted by a false god but carrying the light of the true source. This spark of divine consciousness was never supposed to exist within Yaldabaoth's creation. It was a direct threat to his authority. Humans, now containing a piece of the higher realm, had the potential to perceive beyond the physical world and challenge the systems of control he had established. Yaldabaoth's response was immediate and strategic. If he couldn't remove a divine spark, he would corrupt the perception of those who carried it. He surrounded humanity with distractions, imposed ignorance through the Archons, and built complex systems of deception. He created desire, fear, pain, tools designed to anchor the divine spark to the material world, keeping consciousness focused on survival and mundane concerns rather than seeking its true origin. Yaldabaoth didn't just attempt to suppress human awareness. He engineered a hierarchy that manipulated human understanding of divinity itself. By positioning himself as the ultimate god and creating various layers of spiritual and physical barriers, he ensured that any attempt to reach beyond him would be met with confusion and resistance. Humanity, caught in this trap, was led to worship the very being responsible for its entrapment. Rituals, doctrines, and moral codes were established, not for enlightenment, but to reinforce submission. The Tripartite Tractate pulls no punches in detailing how the human condition was deliberately engineered. Birth wasn't seen as a blessing, it was another mechanism of entrapment. Souls were cycled through reincarnation, repeatedly subjected to amnesia and indoctrination, ensuring they remained unaware of their true origin. Every physical desire, emotional attachment, and worldly pursuit was another chain. And yet, the spark within couldn't be completely extinguished. It flickered, often faintly, driving human curiosity, rebellion, and the urge to seek something beyond the material world. Yaldabaoth, understanding the risk of that flicker growing into a flame, went further. He weaponized knowledge. Half-truths were disseminated through false prophets and distorted spiritual teachings. Systems of belief were designed to appear liberating while subtly reinforcing dependence on external authorities. Even the concept of salvation was twisted, redirected toward worshipping the very entity that engineered the prison. It wasn't enough to keep humanity ignorant, they needed to believe that their chains were a form of protection or divine order. The Archons, serving as Yaldabaoth's enforcers, played their part by manipulating emotions, thoughts, and sensory experiences. They influenced dreams, implanted fears, and encouraged distractions. Every element of human experience, pain, pleasure, ambition, despair, was utilized to maintain focus on the material, preventing the spark from recognizing its connection to the higher realms. Knowledge of self was the ultimate danger to their control structure, and they treated it as such. The Tripartite Tractate doesn't offer comforting answers or easy solutions. It presents a stark reality. Humanity was not created in kindness, but forged out of arrogance and ignorance. The human body, far from being a temple, was initially designed as a cage. Consciousness, the very thing that makes you question, dream, and seek, wasn't a gift. It was a complication that the creators of this world didn't fully anticipate or understand. And that complication is precisely why so much effort has been invested in keeping you distracted, obedient, and unaware. Power doesn't just exist in politics or economics. It has roots in something far older, far deeper, and far more calculated. The real power structure controlling the world isn't made up of governments, corporations, or even religious institutions. Those are just fronts. The real architects of control are the Archons, cosmic enforcers created by Yaldabaoth, designed with one goal: keep humanity in line. These entities aren't just mythological figures, they represent a system of manipulation operating on every level of existence. You're not just living in a society. You're living in a system designed to keep you distracted, obedient, and disconnected from your origin. The Archons aren't physical beings you can point to. Their influence is insidious, embedded in the very fabric of reality. They manipulate thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Think about how easily people get caught up in meaningless pursuits, how fear and desire seem to steer entire populations, and how systems of authority are rarely questioned. That's not accidental. The Archons thrive on chaos and ignorance, ensuring humanity remains preoccupied with survival, consumption, and conflict rather than seeking knowledge of its true nature. Their strategy is disturbingly effective. They operate through hierarchical structures, mirroring Yaldabaoth's delusional claim of supremacy. These structures manifest in the world as layers of authority, from religious dogmas that demand blind faith to political systems that promise change but perpetuate control. Every layer is designed to reinforce dependency. When people seek answers, they are funneled into institutions that offer comforting half-truths while steering them away from genuine understanding. The Archons don't just want obedience, they want willing submission. There's a difference. Coercion sparks rebellion. Manipulation breeds loyalty. And they've perfected that art over millennia. One of the Archons' most dangerous tools is the manipulation of time and memory. The Tripartite Tractate implies that linear time itself is part of the trap, a construct that keeps humanity anchored in the material world, constantly looking forward or backward but never inward. By controlling perceptions of past, present, and future, the Archons ensure that individuals remain reactive, caught in cycles of regret, hope, and fear. Reincarnation isn't portrayed as spiritual evolution, but as a recycling process, souls thrown back into the system, stripped of memory, forced to repeat lessons under the illusion of progress. Religion, as described in the text, isn't exempt. In fact, it's central to the Archons' control. They infiltrated spiritual teachings, twisting them into dogmatic systems that prioritize obedience over understanding. Concepts like sin, punishment, and divine wrath weren't designed to enlighten, they were designed to intimidate. By positioning Yaldabaoth as the ultimate authority and branding alternative perspectives as heresy, the Archons ensured that questioning the system became synonymous with risking eternal damnation. That's psychological warfare on a cosmic scale. Fear is the oldest form of control, and they use it relentlessly. But fear isn't their only tactic. Pleasure, too, is weaponized. The material world is saturated with temptations and distractions, endless pursuits of wealth, status, and sensory gratification. The Archons don't care if you're happy or miserable, as long as you're focused on anything other than your true origin. Pleasure and pain are just two sides of the same coin, tools to keep consciousness tethered to the physical. And while people chase fleeting highs or wallow in lows, the spark within remains dormant. Even knowledge is co-opted. Not all information is liberating. The Archons flood the world with data, trivial facts, endless entertainment, constant stimulation, creating the illusion of enlightenment while overwhelming individuals into apathy. It's a strategy of overload. When everything seems important, nothing is. Genuine knowledge, the kind that leads to gnosis and self-awareness, gets buried under layers of noise. And when someone does stumble upon truths that challenge the system, they're ridiculed, ostracized, or worse, discredited by the very structures designed to suppress dissent. The Tripartite Tractate exposes how deep the manipulation goes. It's not just about controlling actions, it's about shaping perceptions of reality itself. The Archons create false narratives, cultural myths, and societal norms that become self-reinforcing. People police themselves and each other, defending the very systems that oppress them. That's the genius of the Archon strategy. They don't need overt force when they can make people believe the prison is their home. Technology, though not directly mentioned in the ancient text, fits seamlessly into this framework. Tools that could potentially awaken consciousness are often repurposed to deepen the illusion. Constant connectivity becomes constant distraction. The promise of information turns into an endless cycle of superficial engagement. People become consumers of reality rather than participants in it. The Archons adapt, evolving their methods to match humanity's advancements, ensuring the trap remains effective regardless of the era. What makes this system so effective is its subtlety. There's no obvious villain twirling a cosmic mustache. The control is systemic, embedded in every institution, belief system, and cultural norm. And the Tripartite Tractate makes it clear this isn't accidental. It's by design. Yaldabaoth, blinded by arrogance, set it in motion, and the Archons perfected it. Their power lies in remaining unseen, their influence dismissed as superstition or conspiracy by those too entangled in the system to question it. Sophia. The name barely surfaces in mainstream religious discourse, yet in the Tripartite Tractate and broader Gnostic texts, she stands at the heart of the most explosive truths about creation and the cosmic order. How does someone so central to humanity's origins get erased from history? Not marginalized, erased. Her story is the blueprint for everything that went wrong and everything that could challenge the status quo. The early Gnostics didn't just mention Sophia as a side character, they framed her as the catalyst, the trigger for the flawed creation that gave rise to Yaldabaoth and the material world. Sophia wasn't an antagonist. Nor was she a savior in the way traditional theology likes to paint redeemers. Her act, creating without her consort, wasn't born from malice, it was driven by an intense desire for understanding, to grasp the fullness of the divine realm without waiting for permission. That decision shattered the rules of cosmic balance, producing Yaldabaoth, whose arrogance would later enslave the cosmos. Sophia's error wasn't some simple mistake, it was a cosmic rupture that forced every being, from the highest eons to the lowest material forms, into reaction. Yet the institutions that formed modern religious orthodoxy didn't want to grapple with a figure who embodies rebellion, knowledge-seeking, and independence. Sophia represented disobedience to a rigid hierarchy, qualities religious authorities found intolerable. But here's what they didn't expect: despite her mistake, Sophia didn't abandon her creation. When Yaldabaoth declared himself the sole god, she didn't retreat to the higher realms in shame. She acted quietly, strategically. She embedded a spark of her own essence into humanity, not as an act of redemption, but as a direct countermeasure to Yaldabaoth's growing tyranny. That spark wasn't about love or forgiveness. It was about undermining a false god from within his own creation. Sophia's intervention turned humanity into a battleground, each person carrying a fragment of her divine awareness, capable of challenging the false reality imposed by the Archons. The implications of that move were massive. Yaldabaoth created humans to serve him, but Sophia's spark gave them consciousness that exceeded his design. Humanity wasn't supposed to question, to imagine, to rebel. Yet they did. And the more they exercised these faculties, the more unstable Yaldabaoth's control became. So why is this narrative buried? Because it flips the script. Instead of humanity being the result of a benevolent creator's careful crafting, we're the unintended consequence of a cosmic act of defiance endowed with potential that those in power desperately want to suppress. Sophia's story is an uncomfortable truth for patriarchal structures, both ancient and modern. Here was a female figure in the divine hierarchy, powerful, autonomous, and capable of independent creation, being the source of both cosmic disorder and potential liberation. You think religious institutions wanted that narrative floating around? Hardly. So her story was demonized, her actions twisted into warnings about the dangers of pride and disobedience. Gnostic texts that centered Sophia were branded heretical, their followers persecuted and silenced. When the Nag Hammadi texts resurfaced in 1945, revealing these suppressed teachings, it wasn't just an archaeological discovery, it was a revelation of how systematically knowledge had been controlled and erased. Sophia's dual role, creator of a problem and provider of the solution, introduces a complexity most religious systems can't handle. Mainstream theology thrives on clear-cut roles: God is good, evil is separate, and humans must obey. Sophia shatters that simplicity. She shows that cosmic reality is messy, layered, and morally complex. Her actions challenge the black and white thinking that has dominated spiritual thought for centuries. The Tripartite Tractate doesn't offer comforting answers or moral platitudes. It presents a figure who, through her mistake, sets in motion both suffering and the possibility of enlightenment. That kind of nuance terrifies hierarchical systems built on unquestioning faith. And Sophia wasn't working alone. Her intervention set off ripples across the pleroma, drawing in other eons and sparking debates about how, or whether, to intervene further. Some viewed her actions as reckless, others saw them as necessary disruption. This wasn't just her story, it became the central crisis for the entire divine realm. Yet, despite the cosmic backlash, she persisted, not through brute force, but through subtle infiltration. Her method wasn't direct confrontation, it was subversion. By placing a piece of herself in humanity, she turned every human being into a potential agent of awakening. That spark within us, originating from Sophia, is what the Archons have been battling to suppress ever since. Yaldabaoth's solution was control through fear, distraction, and misinformation. But no amount of manipulation could fully extinguish what Sophia ignited. Even when humans forgot their origin, that spark drove them to seek truth, challenge authority, and explore beyond the confines of their imposed reality. This wasn't a coincidence. It was by design, her design. What makes this even more radical is the implication that the path to awareness doesn't come from external salvation, but from internal recognition of the divine spark Sophia placed within. Institutions that depend on gatekeeping spirituality found this narrative intolerable. If people realized they didn't need priests, rituals, or dogmas to access divinity, if they understood that the power resided within them, the entire structures of control would crumble. The Tripartite Tractate doesn't waste time sugarcoating the truth about humanity's essence. It exposes a brutal reality: human beings are vessels, biological containers engineered for control. But inside that structure is something the Archons and Yaldabaoth never fully accounted for: a fragment of divine essence. So how do you contain a threat that can't be physically restrained? You attack its perception. That's exactly what Yaldabaoth and his Archons did. They couldn't remove a divine spark, so they buried it under layers of illusion, conditioning, and psychological warfare. The human soul, the carrier of that divine fragment, is constantly bombarded by forces designed to keep it ignorant of its origin. Every sensory input, every emotional trigger, every cultural norm serves to reinforce the illusion that the physical world is all there is. You're not just born into a body, you are born into a system meticulously designed to trap your awareness. And it's not just about physical distractions. The Archons weaponized human psychology. They introduced desire and fear as twin mechanisms of control, keep people chasing pleasures and running from pains, and they'll never stop to question why they're caught in the cycle to begin with. The Tripartite Tractate makes it clear the body was constructed to be a cage. Hunger, fatigue, lust, pain, all engineered experiences to tether consciousness to material reality. The divine spark might reside within, but it's constantly suffocated by the demands of the flesh. But that wasn't enough for Yaldabaoth. He understood that even amidst suffering, humans might start asking dangerous questions, questions that could lead them inward toward that hidden spark. So he escalated. He manipulated belief systems, creating external gods and authorities that demanded worship and obedience. If people sought the divine, they'd be directed outward to a distant, authoritarian deity rather than inward where the true connection existed. Religion became a tool not of enlightenment, but of redirection. And the irony? People ended up venerating the very being responsible for their enslavement, convinced they were serving a higher purpose. The Tripartite Tractate doesn't present this as some abstract metaphor. It's explicit: the soul is under siege. The Archons operate across dimensions, influencing thoughts, dreams, and emotions to keep the divine spark dormant. They exploit memory, ensuring that each incarnation wipes away previous knowledge. Reincarnation isn't presented as a path to spiritual growth, it's a containment loop. Die, forget, be reborn, repeat. Each lifetime becomes another layer of conditioning, another opportunity for the Archons to tighten their grip. And when humans get close to awakening, when they start to feel that flicker of divine origin, Yaldabaoth's system activates countermeasures. Doubt creeps in. Fear intensifies. Distractions multiply. Anything to pull consciousness back into the material and away from the inner truth. It's not accidental that spiritual seekers often encounter their greatest struggles just as they begin to perceive the illusion. That's the system defending itself. The body-soul dynamic outlined in the Tripartite Tractate is a cosmic tug-of-war. On one side, the biological construct, perfectly designed to ensnare. On the other, the divine spark, constantly pressured but never fully extinguished. And that spark is dangerous precisely because it's not passive. It remembers. Buried beneath layers of conditioning, there's an awareness that knows the material world is a facade. That memory, faint as it may be, is what the Archons fear most. Because once the spark fully awakens, the entire control structure begins to unravel. The Archons aren't complacent. They evolve their tactics. Ancient methods of control, fear of gods, threats of punishment, still work, but they've adapted to exploit modern consciousness too. Endless information floods the mind, overwhelming it with noise so the inner voice is drowned out. Comfort becomes a trap. Convenience becomes a cage. And all the while, that spark is there, dimmed, ignored, but never gone. When it comes to history, the real story is often what gets erased. The Tripartite Tractate is one of those texts that didn't just vanish by accident, it was systematically buried. Why? Because what it reveals isn't just inconvenient. It's explosive. It calls out the power structures that have shaped human thought for over 2 millennia. If you think the early church fathers were just sorting through harmless philosophical disagreements when deciding which texts made it into the Bible, think again. This was about control. The text didn't just get lost. It was deliberately suppressed. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, Christianity was splintered into competing factions. Gnostic groups were gaining traction, offering perspectives that completely undermined the emerging Orthodox narrative. The Gnostics weren't claiming to reject Christ, they were claiming to understand his teachings on a level the Orthodox Church either couldn't grasp or didn't want people to hear. The Tripartite Tractate exposed the very foundations of the organized religious structure for what it was: a system of control built on fear, obedience, and the worship of a false god. The stakes were massive. If people believed the Gnostics that the creator of the material world was a flawed, ignorant being, and that true divinity was beyond the God of the Old Testament, it would dismantle the theological hierarchy being built. The bishops, priests, and emerging church authorities didn't just need people to believe in God. They needed people to believe in their version of God, one that justified obedience, submission, and the authority of the church. The Tripartite Tractate was the opposite of that narrative. It told people a spark of divinity was inside them. No priest, no temple, no sacrifice required. That's not a message institutions founded on control can tolerate. So the campaign to suppress Gnostic texts went into full force. By the time of the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, the agenda was clear: unified doctrine, eliminate dissent. Books that didn't align with the approved narrative were branded heretical. They were burned, banned, and their followers persecuted. Gnostic communities, once thriving in places like Egypt, Syria, and Greece, were systematically dismantled. The Tripartite Tractate, along with dozens of other texts, was buried, literally hidden away to avoid total destruction. The reason we have it today is because someone, likely a Gnostic monk, knew the purge was coming and took steps to preserve it. That's how the Nag Hammadi Library was discovered in 1945 or 17 centuries later. But ask yourself, why go to such lengths to erase a text if it was just myth or speculation? Institutions don't waste time crushing harmless ideas. They target threats. The Tripartite Tractate didn't just present theological differences, it challenged the legitimacy of the entire power structure that had begun to shape Western civilization. The Church wasn't just offering spiritual guidance. It was consolidating political power. By the 4th century, Christianity wasn't just a religion, it was becoming the official ideology of the Roman Empire. And you can't build an empire on a foundation that tells people the system is a lie. This wasn't a passive process. It was aggressive. Heretics weren't just excommunicated, they were hunted, tortured, and executed. Texts were sought out and destroyed with military precision. The Gnostics didn't just lose a theological debate, they were obliterated from history books. The winners wrote the narrative, painting Gnosticism as dangerous, confusing, even satanic. Public memory was rewritten so thoroughly that most people today have never even heard of the Tripartite Tractate, let alone understood why it was so dangerous to those in power. And what's even more staggering is how effective that suppression was. For over 1,600 years, these ideas were lost to the public. The Bible became the uncontested narrative, shaping moral codes, legal systems, and cultural norms across continents. Meanwhile, texts like the Tripartite Tractate, which challenged the legitimacy of earthly authority and urged people to seek direct, personal knowledge of the divine, sat in clay jars, forgotten in the Egyptian desert. When the Nag Hammadi texts were finally uncovered, the academic and religious establishment scrambled to downplay their significance. They called them Gnostic fantasies, heretical ramblings, or early Christian diversity to neutralize the threat. But anyone who reads the Tripartite Tractate without bias can see what's at stake. This isn't just some alternative perspective on spirituality. It's a direct indictment of a global system built on a false premise. Reality is not what you think it is. Everything you've been taught about God, creation, and your place in the universe has been carefully constructed to keep you in the dark. The world you see isn't just a flawed creation. It's a manufactured system, a layered construct designed to trap your consciousness. The question isn't whether you've been lied to. The real question is, how deep does the deception go? The Tripartite Tractate reveals a cosmic architecture far more complex and unsettling than any traditional religion dares to admit. There is the pleroma, the realm of fullness, the source of true divinity, and then there's the material world, a counterfeit reality crafted by a rogue being, Yaldabaoth, who mistook his limited power for ultimate authority. He didn't just create a flawed universe. He built a prison. The layers of this prison aren't just physical. They're psychological, spiritual, and dimensional. Every aspect of the material world, from time itself to the emotions you feel, serves to anchor you here, preventing awareness of the higher realms. Yaldabaoth and his Archons didn't just lock the doors to higher consciousness, they threw away the key and replaced it with illusions. False gods, distorted teachings, endless distractions, tools designed to keep you looking outward for answers that have been inside you all along. The Tripartite Tractate isn't subtle about this. It doesn't ask you to believe, it dares you to confront the possibility that the entire framework of reality has been manipulated. And if that doesn't make you uncomfortable, you're not paying attention. What's worse is how meticulously this system has adapted over millennia. Ancient civilizations were controlled through fear of wrathful gods. Later, organized religions codified those fears into doctrine. Today, the manipulation is more sophisticated, endless entertainment, consumer culture, the illusion of choice. But the core strategy remains the same: keep you focused on the external, and you'll never turn inward to discover the spark of divinity placed within you. That spark, the remnant of Sophia's intervention, is the one variable Yaldabaoth couldn't fully control. It's why so much effort has been invested in keeping you ignorant, distracted, and obedient. Gnostic teachers, early mystics, visionaries, many of them were systematically erased, their works destroyed, their names vilified. The suppression wasn't accidental. It was calculated. Knowledge that could liberate humanity was buried, labeled heresy, and replaced with narratives that served the Archons' agenda. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945 was a fluke, a cosmic glitch in the system that allowed these suppressed truths to resurface. And yet, even now, most people ignore them, too conditioned to question what they've been told. The Tripartite Tractate describes a reality where human beings are caught between two opposing forces, one striving to keep them asleep, the other desperately trying to awaken them. It's not a battle fought with weapons. It's a war for consciousness. And make no mistake, the Archons are playing for keeps. They rely on complacency, on your willingness to accept the surface-level explanations of reality. They don't care if you're happy or miserable. They care that you don't ask the right questions. Questions like, why am I here? Who benefits from my ignorance? What truths have been hidden from me? The most unsettling aspect? This isn't over. The system is still active. The Archons' methods have evolved, but their objective remains unchanged: maintain control. Keep the spark dormant. Prevent awakening. The Tripartite Tractate wasn't just written for its time, it was a warning for the ages, a message buried under centuries of lies, waiting for those willing to dig deep enough to find it. And you, right now, you've heard it. You can't claim you didn't know. The layers of deception are thick, but the cracks are there for anyone willing to look closely. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Because the Archons are counting on you to forget, to dismiss this as just another story. But the Tripartite Tractate didn't survive 1,600 years of suppression for no reason. It's here now, in your awareness, daring you to confront the reality behind the illusion. Thank you for sticking with me through this entire journey. I know this isn't easy information to process. It challenges everything you've been taught. But you made it to the end, and that says a lot. I appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to explore these hidden truths. There's more out there, far more than most people realize. Stay sharp, stay questioning, and most importantly, stay awake. Thanks for watching.